I invite any children that are present to come forward to the screen and see if I can see you and give me a wave. I'll assume there's children out there, or people behaving like children, I'm not sure which. Well, this story, this Time for All Ages, it actually has got, there's many different versions of it around. It's definitely a North American story, and we believe it comes from indigenous traditions of North America, but we're not exactly sure which locale. And it's a story of these two farmers who have kind of just moved into the area through a couple of generations, and they have this piece of land between them that they keep arguing about whether one owns it or the other owns it. And they get into these arguments, and they were friends, but then it became this huge conflict, and it really struggled and caused tension in the friendship. So they decided that they would go and let's go and talk to the local religious leader and see if he can help us. So they went and talked to the local religious leader, and he said, well, I don't really know. Tell me who you think owns it. And they each told their stories. And he said, I'm sorry, I can't decide. I don't know how to solve this. So he said, well, we're going to take it to court. So they took it to the local court, the local law system, and they argued about it for days and days, and they still couldn't decide. It wasn't clear who owned it. So they weren't sure what to do. But the judge, who was quite smart, said, well, why don't you go and talk to the oldest person who's lived here? They might know. They're a very wise person. So they decide, yeah, that's a good idea. They might know the answer. So they go, and it happened to be that the longest person that lived there was from the local indigenous tribe. And so they went to meet this person and said, we don't know who owned the land. Do you remember? And he says, I don't. We do not have that in our stories of our tradition, but I know I can find the answer. And I said, but you have to honor whatever answer I come up with. So I will help you decide this, because I know I can find the answer, but you have to honor my answer. And so the parents thought, well, we can't resolve it. We've tried everything else. Let's do it. He said, but you have to come with me to the land. So the indigenous person and the two people who were arguing all went out to the land. And he looked around, and it was a nice piece of land, not particularly beautiful, not particularly useful, but it had been causing so much trouble. And the indigenous person looks around and says, tell me why you think you own it. And the first person goes into it. Well, my grandparents said they came and they took the land. And he talked to the second person and said, my grandparents came and they claimed that they own the land as well. So I feel we own it. And the indigenous person said, I'm going to ask a third group. I'm going to ask the land. And we all have to listen for the answer. So he gets down on his knees and he asks the question and he listens. And he's there for about 30, 40 minutes, just listening to the land. And he said, well, the land had many stories to tell me, but it basically said that neither of you own the land owns you. So the land owns you. So that means your duty, both of you together, is to care for this land, to love that land, and to help it heal from any hardships that it's had. You do not own the land owns you. And I love that story for the idea of, because we talk about in religious terms, this word stewardship, which you've probably heard. And that means we have a responsibility to care and help heal whatever damage the earth, the land around us, the water, the air has suffered. It's our responsibility, it's our calling to heal it. That is what we mean by stewardship. We are responsible for caring for the land. And when we think of the interdependent web of all existence, which we talk about as a seventh principle, we are related to the land. It will provide for us, and we need to care for it. So thank you so much for listening. This morning reading comes from Unitarian Universalist queer minister, Reverend Ashley Horan. She's one of the strategists in the UU movement's justice work nationally. And this is called Fierce Urgency. My 4-year-old daughter has taught me this lesson. When a child wants to derail business as usual to curb the hubris of adults who dare believe in schedules and plans and productivity, One fierce little body and one clear, piercing voice, strategically applied to the right pressure point, will change the course of the day's events. My comrades in organizing have taught me this lesson. When a silenced people want to be heard, to raise from dry bones a living, breathing dream of new ways of moving, being, incarnating freedom. One small, tenacious group whose heart beat in rhythm, rising shoulder to shoulder against the inevitable, will bend the arc of impossibility to hope. Our young climate leaders are teaching us this lesson: when the grown-ups in the old movements are too slow as the sea levels rise and the hurricanes rage and migrants flee and the corporate profit, one generation, both young and silenced, refusing to accept the inheritance of doom, will take towards the street and move us towards life. Blessings upon them as they teach us, organize us, beckon us in, and call us out. May their fierce urgency and uncompromising clarity show us the path towards healing and freedom and hope. Blessed be Ashe and Amen. Those are the words of Unitarian Universalist Minister, Reverend Ashley Horan. Thank you. I'd like to introduce our guest worship leader this morning, Jim Thompson. And I'd never heard of Jim. I'd never met with him until we were in a social justice committee meeting about 2 months ago. And we were talking about a social justice worship service around climate change. And then all the people in the social, well, I wouldn't say all, but the vast majority of people in the social action committee mentioned Jim and how much they loved him and how inspiring he was and the work he was doing and how he was really bringing spirituality and making this, giving us some real effective steps of how we can address climate change. So it was a certain trepidation. I gave Jim a call, like, this guy seems so impressive. I'm not sure I'm worthy of speaking to this person. And, but Jim was fabulous. We had a great conversation. And it was just, I'm really excited to have him lead worship or co-lead worship with me today. I think he'll bring a lot. And it's been a pleasure getting to know him over the last 2-3 months. And as he said at the end of the Casablanca, I hope this is the beginning of a beautiful relationship. So Jim founded the Positive Coaching Alliance, a national movement to transform youth sports, and co-founded the Recovery Cafe in San Jose, a healing community for individuals traumatized by homelessness, mental illness, and drug abuse. He's taught courses in coaching, leadership, and sport, spirituality in Stanford's University's Continuing Studies program. Jim loves poetry and teaches a weekly online spiritual poetry class that I know some members of UUFRC attend. He's got an MBA from Stanford University, where he was the Director of Public Management and named during his tenure as the nation's top non-profit business management program. And he's founded This Is What We Did, which is, a non-profit he founded to combat the most dangerous threat in history of humanity and answer the ultimate question: what did you do to fight climate change? Which I think was a question that was asked to him by his grandchildren, and he thought he needed a good answer to that. But he wasn't just going to speak an answer; he had to really live into the answer, and that's what he did. So I'd like to thank Jim for joining us this morning, and I'd like to invite Jim. And one of the things Jim believes is that conversations is a spiritual act. So we decided we're not going to have a sermon today. Jim and I are going to have a conversation about climate change. Some of it's planned, most of it's not going to be. And Jim and I have agreed to that. So I'd like to thank you, Jim. Thanks for joining us today, and welcome.
Brian, it's really a pleasure to be with you all. And a special hello to Deborah Pritchard and Debbie Meitels and Thomas Achtel, who I've been working with for some time now. I've been thinking about the concept of spirituality, compare and contrasted with religion. Religion to me is about belief and belonging. I belong to Church X, and I believe the way members of Church X believe. to me, spirituality is the practical ways we orient ourselves to the sacred. Sacred being things of ultimate value. What is it in our life that really matters to us? For some people, that involves God or a higher power. Other people, not necessarily. But spirituality is the way we orient ourselves to the sacred. Sacred being ultimate reality, and it's always a challenge. The challenge of spirituality is with us throughout our whole life. What's really important to us, and what do we actually do to orient ourselves to that? And I know, Brian, from the wonderful conversations we've had over the past few weeks, that spirituality is integral to your life, your calling, the three congregations that are with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Yeah, I mean, I think you could, when you've got Unitarian Universalists in the room, you've usually got more opinions than people. And so I'm going to answer for myself here, and hopefully it might connect to some of the others. But I think one of the things Unitarian Universalism does, and I think this is an overlap with some of your thinking, Jim, is that we almost hold our relationships of ultimate value as sacred. And, and the relationships in the broader sense, the relationships with ourselves. I mean, I think we sometimes forget about that. We think of relationships with other, but, the sacredness with our inner values, our inner principles, those things that give our life's meaning. And then I think that your relationships to the community around us. And then I think regarding climate change and climate justice, I think it's a relationship to the planet and all the living creatures on it. And then the relationship to the higher power, to God, that some of us believe in, to love, that connection to something beyond ourselves. And I think that's really important. And I mentioned to Jim, and I've mentioned to UUFRC, one of the guiding principles for me around Unitarian Universalism, I don't think believing God's a particularly useful question, is, but what do you love and inspires you to live life fully? And what breaks your heart and calls you to action? And I think when I look at how the love of this planet, the love of nature, the love of animals, and how the abuse and the destruction that's happening breaks my heart, it plays right into that. And of course, our seventh principle is the respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are part. And the interdependence doesn't just mean a passive admirers of us beauties and its pain. It actually encourages us to be nurturers and healers of the earth. And I loved what you said earlier in some of our discussions. You talked about how there's a distinction in your mind about spirituality in a time of climate change. So I'd love to hear, Jim, when you think, how has spirituality changed for you? And what do you mean when you talk about spirituality in a time of climate change?
Yes, the climate change is up the ante for all of us. When I was in high school, my senior year of high school, I took the civil service exam and got a job with the post office in my hometown of West Fargo, North Dakota. I had a pretty cool job. This was a summer before I went away to college. Whenever an employee of the post office took vacation that summer, I took their job. I subbed for them for that, so I learned a lot. There was a postman named Marlon Moe, tall, lanky guy, long legs, moved very quickly, very efficient and effective at his job, which I found to my chagrin when I subbed for him when he went on vacation. I've had a real hard time getting anywhere close to doing his job in the time that he did it. Years later, Marlon abandoned his route. He did not deliver the mail. Years later, in his obituary, that day was highlighted. He was coming down the street and he saw a house that was on fire. And he found out that there were two children in the house, in the back of the house. They were not able to be rescued because they were behind all the fire. So he went into the house and he came out with the older child. He went back into the house at great risk to himself and came out with a younger child. The mail was not delivered that day, but those two children were saved. I think this is a perfect metaphor for us in climate change. The house is on fire. We often don't recognize it. We might be at the front of the house. The fire is at the back of the house. The trip that 14 of us made to Minnesota this past 10 days was to, we weren't delivering the mail those days. We were there to try to stop something that is really, really harmful to the world. And we have, I think that the regular challenge of spirituality, what is important to us, what is so important that we will move towards it, is so much greater in a time of climate change because the house is burning. And what is it that we can do that will help to put that fire out?
Yeah, it's a great image of the house being on fire. And I think that's what Greta Thunberg said when she spoke to the UN climate. Actually, the house is on fire. Why are you not addressing it? It shouldn't be up to us, the children, to raise this question. And
Brian, I saw the Dalai Lama and Greta Thunberg on a webinar, and I have great admiration for the Dalai Lama, but he said something just really bad. He said, we old folks have screwed up the world. Now you young folks have to go fix it. And I said, no, we older folks have to do everything we can. We can't, again, I still have a lot of admiration for the Dalai Lama, but I totally disagree with him on that.
yeah. Could you say a bit more about that, Jim? Like, I think you've mentioned to me before, there's an untapped resource of this older generation to address climate change. Could you say a little more?
Yeah, absolutely. Our mission statement for this is what we did is to help grow the movement, not to create a movement, there is a movement, to help grow it. And what we really have to do is break the power of the fossil fuel industry, which is destroying the world, really. And we do that through dynamic presentations, educational experiences, a welcoming community, very much like the people in this room, and easy access on-ramp actions that people can do to help cut that power. And I can talk a little bit of that now, but I'll talk about it more in terms of moving our money out of climate bad banks. You mentioned, I love that phrase, I never heard it before, conversations are sacred. Yes, that's how we connect with people. That's how we create solidarity. And, it's been said many times that the powers that be have money and we have people. It's a lot easier to organize money than it is to organize people. And it's the relationships that we develop, the trust that we develop in each other, the kindness we show to each other that helps us create those relationships and the solidarity we need to make a big difference.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I always think I mentioned about the interdependent web earlier on, like how we can influence the world and how we are obviously influenced by the earth around us. But I always think, if you look at human history, for the large part of human history, we weren't really influencing the world that much, maybe physically, but not chemically as we're doing now. And, so we were really dependent on the earth. But now, with the rise of the Industrial Revolution over the 200 years and the last 200 years, of course, the carbon dioxide and the global warming, that we have been impacting the earth. But really, I think the earth's going to survive. It may not be fit for humans that are going to survive. So it's in our own self-interest to make the world livable for us. So, but one of the things that I struggle with is religious communities have been really, really slow in addressing and climate change. I mean, really, in the 1970s, the rise of the environmental movement really wasn't, for the most part, religious. It was really secular. And I wonder, why do you think religion has been slow in addressing climate change, and what do you think religion can bring to the work of climate justice?
There's a prophetic church in Washington, D.C. called the Church of the Savior that my wife and I have been not really members of because so we don't live there, but connected to. And even the Recovery Cafe, which started in Seattle, was started by a member of the Church of the Savior. Gordon Cosby was a chaplain in World War II, and he got out of the war, and he started this church in Washington, D.C. because he said, I could not tell the difference between what he called churched and unchurched people. His feeling was, if a church is effective, you should be able to tell the difference. And so he strove to create a church where you could tell a difference between church and unchurched people. I think I don't have a good analysis of why churches are slow in this area, and I'm not really critical of them, other than business as usual, delivering the mail is normal. And we as humans, historically, you know, you see these, you know, pictures and stuff of humans, early humans with spears hunting animals. The reality was originally we were hunted. It was the saber-toothed tigers were hunting humans. And what protected people was getting together. You know, maybe the tiger would get somebody on the edge, but if you had everybody together, there was safety in numbers. And it was really, really hard for people to, basically, if you got ostracized from the group, it was a death sentence. Now, it's not necessarily a death sentence, but we feel that way in our bones, that when we go against the grain of the norm of the society, we feel like we're putting our life at risk. The lovely thing about churches and religious communities is you can talk explicitly about values, about sacredness, about what, and that gives a religious community like the ones here today a springboard that can be used to take real action. And I realized you asked about older people, and I got caught off. This is, you know, I'm 72 years old, and many of the people involved with this are in their 50s, 60s. And we actually said, we believe that people 50 years and older are an untapped resource. I have this image of a person on their deathbed, and they've got just hours left, and they want to get one more letter off to the CEO of Chase Bank, you know, stop financing destruction of the world. And then they can go to their maker.
So I think a lot of us struggle, you know, feeling, what can we do about climate change? I mean, it seems such a vast issue. What can I do as a person? What can I even do as a church community? Or what can we do as a church community? How do you stay hopeful and stay inspired in the work that you do?
Well, one of the things I've really worked on is admitting that I get depressed a lot. You know, it's like, hey, I'm cool, and other people get depressed, but not me. No, I get depressed a lot. And some of you may have heard the term FUD, F-U-D, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And I actually give a rating in the morning. I wake up, okay, what's my FUD level? It's really high, or it's really low. And I meditate. Poetry is a big help for me because poetry gives me courage. In fact, Ryan, if you don't mind, I'd like to read a short poem here by a poet named Judy Sorum Brown. It's called Trough.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
There is a trough in waves, a low spot where horizon disappears and only sky and water are our company. And there we lose our way unless we rest, knowing the wave will bring us to its crest again. There we may drown if we fear. If we let fear hold us within its grip and shake us side to side and leave us flailing, torn, disoriented. But if we rest there in the trough, are silent, being with the low part of the wave, keeping our energy and noticing the shape of things, the flow, then time alone will bring us to another place where we can see horizon, see the land again, regain our sense of where we are and where we need to swim. I think I shared with you, Brian, the one of the final quotes of St. Francis of Assisi. He, just before he died, he said, I am at peace because I have done what I've been given to do. And I have right over my desk here, what is it I have been given to do? There's lots of things I can't do, but what am I given to do? And the combination of all those things is how I work with the despair and discouragement and depression I get.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. That was beautiful. When I was listening to that, I was struck by the words of Rachel Naomi Remen. She says, we are called to fix the world because it's broke, not because it's broken. We're here to serve it because it is holy. And I think that idea of placing, that the earth is sacred in itself and our relationship with it is sacred is, and for me, that drives me to this idea of the lifestyle of healing for myself, healing for others, healing for the planet. And I see that in your work, Jim, that you're doing. It's like you're trying to create a lifestyle, like your financial investments. It's a lifestyle of healing. And I wonder if you'd like to, speak to that. Like how do you see that we can create this lifestyle of healing in our everyday lives that will have a big impact?
Absolutely. I mentioned earlier that conversations are such an important thing. And solidarity, and how do we become solidarities with each other? Let me tell you about a couple climate conversations I had when I was in Minnesota. We drove there. We went through. It was like 95 degrees. It was hot. We went through training, and then Monday was the big day. We got up at 4:15 a.m. We drove to the site. We all did a caravan to Abridged's a pumping station that was, Abridged Line 3 is bringing tar sands oil, the dirtiest fuel possible. Tar sands is not even oil; it's solid. In order to make it flow, you have to get all kinds of rotten chemicals in it. It's just horrible. So we get there, we get out of the car, and we're rushing, thinking there's going to be police stopping us. But there aren't any. We just take over the whole place. There are hundreds of people there. That was at like 7 in the morning. About 5 o'clock, the police come and surround the place and start arresting people. And we're arm in arm. And I had decided the day before that I was going to be arrestable. I had told my wife, I'm going to Minnesota, but I'm going to support the people who aren't going to get arrested or who are going to get arrested. And so about 11 o'clock that night, so we've been up since 4 a.m. 11 o'clock that night, I got taken away to be arrested. We're in this open area. It felt like we're on our knees or on sitting, and it felt like we were in a meadow in the moonlight. It wasn't a moonlight; it was a big spotlight. But it just felt, and I think everybody there was really calm, and grateful. We had done what we wanted to do. And then a policeman came and got me, very polite, very kind. You've heard of Minnesota Nice. Well, this was a Minnesota Nice. He's actually a game warden that they had pulled in because there were so many people there. And he takes me over and they get my information. And it's like catch and release. They cited me and they're releasing us. So he walks me so I had like 4 or 5 minutes to talk with him. And I said, I really want you to know why I'm doing this. And I said, you can't say anything, but let me tell you why. And he said, I'm listening. And then he said later, I'm reading a lot about climate change. We had this really lovely conversation. That was a connection. Later, the next day, that evening, we went into local Walker, Minnesota, beautiful little town, and went grocery shopping, did laundry, and we're at the liquor store. And we're getting ready to pay for beer and wine. We have a little celebration. And I said to the woman, at the clerk, I said, you're serving a bunch of criminals. And so I said, we got arrested and what do you think about that, about Line 3? And she said, I think it's a tragedy if they don't do it, that if they bring oil through railroads, tracks and stuff, if they don't deliver the mail, that'll be worse. And I realized that the conversation, I didn't do the conversation well with her. I cut her off. I could have gotten her speaking more. It's when you make conversations, when you reach out to people, I call it the empathy cascade. When you look at somebody and say, what is that person going through? And that leads to kindness. That leads to connection. That connection leads to solidarity, to community, a team like we had with our affinity group. That I just love what you said earlier. Conversations are sacred, and those connections are sacred.
Thank you, Jim. I know we're going to need to finish up, but we're going to have time again at noon today to continue the conversation. It'll be more us hearing from you. But I'd like to just ask one final question. You were touching on it there about conversation being sacred. different people have different responses. There's some hardened environmental climate change activists. There's those who want to do something who don't know what to do. There's people who are kind of on this fence and uncertain. What about climate deniers? How do you have conversations with them? You know, and how do you engage them in a way that you've found constructive?
It's everybody I know has a relative or friends who are, if not climate deniers, are way over on that side. It's actually not that hard, because the good news is it's not that hard. The bad news is climate change is coming to take everything everybody cares about. So Dusty Baker, who is the manager of the Houston Astros, who's been a friend of mine for a long time, he's a hunter and a fisherman. I'm not big on hunting and fishing, but he's concerned about climate change because when he goes to Alaska, there aren't as many animals to hunt or fish. So in our climate change, effective climate conversations training that we'll be offering soon again, we look for ways to connect with people. What are their values? My minister at Urban Sanctuary San Jose, Dana Bainbridge, is from Iowa, and she would talk to her people in Iowa about sea level rising. They don't care about that. If San Francisco gets flooded, so what? So you talk to them about the land, that the farmland, 20 million acres of Iowa farmland 2 summers ago was flooded and not available. So there's a way to do it, and I hope many of you will join us with that, because if we can keep those conversations going, that's what's going to help turn the tide.
Thank you so much, Jim. I just want to thank you for being present with us today. Your life, your work, your words are so inspiring. I know they've inspired me, and I imagine they inspire others. And as I say, I hope this is the beginning of a beautiful relationship, which will be continuing in half an hour at noon with your workshop.
Thank you, Brian.
But thanks for doing your work to turn the world around. And I'd like to invite everyone to get up and dance and sing. We're going to sing Harry Belafonte's great song, Turn the World Around.